Welcome to Sparking Everyday Discipleship, where we disciple parents to disciple their children with everyday discipleship every day. I'm so glad that you joined us today and are spending some time with us. I'm your host, Terry Hellard Brown, and we have a really special guest to share with you today. Ginny Cruz is with us, and she has a wonderful book that is a guide for moms. It's called The New Mom's Guide. And she is a physical therapist. She's a pediatric physical therapist, and she has 2 adopted sons and just has so much experience and so many wonderful tips and ideas to share with us today. I know you're going to be blessed. So now let's join the conversation. Well, Ginny, thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest with us, Ginny Cruz, and I'm so excited to talk to you about your book, The New Mom's Guide. So tell me, first of all, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, what prompted me to write this book was basically God sending me in a different direction than what I originally intended. I had originally intended to write a book of devotions for new moms. And that's still something that's on my heart. But as I, traveled the road of Christian publishing and all of those things, the only interest I got was for me to write something that's kind of for the secular market, which this book is, but it has a biblical worldview. I weave my belief system through there without it being strictly a religious book. So I had a contract for this book. And I had that contract with a publisher for 3 years, and short story is basically they never got around to publishing it. So I felt God saying, get your rights back and publish it yourself, and that's what I've done. So following God's path weaves around whatever. So I ended up writing this basically because that's what the market seemed to want. So that's what I wrote.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about the book and what it helps moms and parents with.
Well, the book basically is a little bit different than the other books that are kind of on the market for new mothers. Most of the books on the market are more like medical, how to deal with diaper rash, how to deal with these kind of things. But, as a pediatric physical therapist, what I began to see in my practice since the COVID lockdowns is that we began to see a significant increase in referrals for developmental delays that were not necessarily related to a diagnosis. They were related to what was going on in the home. I was working at that time for the early intervention programs, which are in all states in the United States, some form of early intervention. In Florida, where I was living, it's called Early Steps. I was part of the intake evaluation team. So we would do evaluations on babies that were showing delays or at risk for delay. Obviously, a child that already has a diagnosis, maybe Down syndrome, extreme prematurity, things like that, those children automatically got evaluated because they had something that had already been identified that was most likely going to have some developmental delay. What we began to see during COVID, and definitely as we came out of COVID, was a lot of those children were developing delays in speech. They were developing delays in social skills, big time, emotional problems, and social anxiety, and also play skills, cognitive skills. I read recently that has been scientifically shown already, but 70% of speech therapists were reporting developmental delays in those areas, significant increases in referrals. So it wasn't just where we were. So this book is basically designed to try to share with moms most of the stuff that we were showing mothers. If a child was delayed, these were some of the techniques that we were teaching them to try to remediate those issues. Early intervention, for those who don't know, basically is not so much like therapy for the child. It's education for the parents. So for babies up to age 3 in that early intervention window, the goal of early intervention is to find developmental delays early, try to remediate them so by the time the child goes to school, they're caught up or they're not as delayed as maybe they would be. Hopefully, many of them do catch up. So what we try to do is empower the parents, usually the mother, to try to change maybe the way she's doing things, alter things a little bit to try to get a different response from the child. So that's basically what this book is. I've got about 400 play suggestions in there that don't seem like rocket science, but for moms of my generation, it's kind of like this is the way parenting was before we had technology.
Hmm.
And the technology and the screens and those things are what is causing these delays in many of these
That's
children
so
because they're
fascinating.
so zoned in and they're not
Yeah.
interacting. And they're being trained, I think, by the screens to lack impulse control, to lack
Hmm.
patience. Because, I mean, I do it myself. If I'm scrolling videos, I don't like it anymore. I just keep going. It's not the same in the real world. You can't just like swipe somebody away from you. You have to interact with them. And that's what they were not learning that.
I notice that I put it on like double speed,
Yeah.
so I can get through it faster. And I'm like, this is probably not the best practice. And then you can get impatient with people who speak at a normal speed.
Yes, I'm
But
finding it in myself. I find it in
yeah.
myself. I have more trouble just reading a book, and I have to put the phone further away from me so I'm not just picking it up to check things. But our brains were formed before technology.
Yeah.
That's the problem here that we still don't know the full impact of is that the brains of babies and toddlers, they're not forming the same kind of pathways that ours did. And that's been shown on MRIs that certain parts of their brains are underdeveloped and certain parts are overdeveloped. The underdeveloped parts are like the impulse control, perseverance, speech and communication, reading body language, because they're not interacting with people, they're interacting with machines.
That is so interesting. Wow, what a gift you're giving parents in this book. Our two oldest were born with clefts.
Right,
And so every time they had a surgery, I saw them go back. It was
right.
like their development not just stalled, it reverted back to it right before. And we would play catch up after a
Mhm.
surgery. We went through that cycle, because with clefts, they do like a zillion surgeries up till they're
Mhm.
in their teens. And ours, because they were autistic,
Right.
just finished their last surgery as adults because they weren't ready with the autism to deal with their teeth and everything till now. So it's been their whole lives. And it's been, two step forwards, one step
There's a
back.
real difficult combination there. Sensory issues, autism, and having to have cleft
Yes,
palate surgery. That was a challenge, Terry. That was a challenge.
it was. But
Yes,
they're awesome. They did great.
that's
But it
good.
just took longer.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we've dealt with that with our kids being on the spectrum. Of course, they, especially my oldest son, he loves his screens, and getting him
Mhm.
off the screens and to interact with people has been a concerted effort.
It is a challenge. And this book, I'm trying to let parents know, especially moms, it's not a judgmental thing. It's not a you're doing this wrong. Today's mothers grew up on screens, and you can't live without being on screens now. Honestly, you can't. Everything, you pretty much have to be on an app for it. So that's one thing I'm trying not to give them like guilt, but just an awareness that you have to control the screen use and you have to really monitor that because we don't really know some of the impacts of this long term. We see children today in the school systems and they're having issues we didn't used to have. You have children that just cannot seem to sit still. They cannot interact with people. They can't wait. I've had kindergarten teachers tell me they can't wait. They're fidgeting constantly. And kids have always been fidgety, but not at this level, not to where they're just lashing out, hitting people like they have no impulse control. So whether that can be reversed, we don't really know. We don't really know that yet. So I don't want them to be guilty, but I want them to go, hey, this is something new you maybe didn't
Mhm.
realize before your generation, things were a lot different. And everything about this generation is like, when my mother raised me, I mean, women smoked, they drank. We don't think about them doing that now, but things change. We learn with hindsight, some of the things you're doing is not really going to be that good.
Yeah. And I love that attitude and pointing that out, that we're the same with everything we're teaching about discipleship. We're not trying to put a guilt trip on anyone. We're just trying to give
Right.
them tools because we see a need. We see that these
Mhm.
things, maybe they were blind spots before, or maybe they weren't a problem before, but we need to approach them now. So we're
Mhm.
not trying to pile things on parents, but we want to give them tools that they can use when they need
Right.
them. So, yeah, I hope our listeners understand that we're here to equip and help and empower, not to
Right.
tear down or guilt trip anybody, because we can guilt trip ourselves enough. Let's be real.
Well, I'd be the first to say I didn't do it perfectly when my children were growing up, but you learn as you go,
Yeah,
and these moms are learning as they go. And if they happen to tune in to what we're sharing here today, maybe they're ready to hear something that they need to apply.
yeah, that's great. Well, we talk a lot about discipleship, and I kind of separate mentoring and discipleship. I talk about, and they really probably shouldn't be totally separated, especially when we're talking about our children, because we are mentoring them as well as discipling them
Mhm.
spiritually, whatever we're teaching them and helping them, because our end goal is not to have obedient children, but to have functioning adults who are great citizens and who are good
Right.
family members. So tell us your story, first of all. I know you adopted two children. Tell us about that, and then tell us about how you have done discipleship and mentoring in your home.
Well, I grew up in a strong Christian family, a small southern town in Mississippi. We like to joke and say every time the doors were open at the church, we were there. But my parents were of the generation where we didn't really do active discipleship with parents and children. Now, there may have been some families that did that, but it was more common that you just learned from what you watched. They modeled Christian beliefs, Christian behaviors, whatever, and you learn from what you observed. They didn't like preach it to you or whatever, you just watched. So that's how I grew up. And that's the thing I would want mothers today to kind of realize based on kind of what my book is about, which is your daily routines. How are you interacting with your child during your daily routines? Are you just putting him in front of cartoons while you do other things? And I did a lot of that. However, I did turn that TV. We didn't have the handheld screens. Those are really more dangerous than the television. But when your child is so preoccupied, they're not watching you, then they're not learning from you. I watched my grandmothers in the kitchen. I saw them make pies. We learn from watching. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of children today are in their own little world, right? So if I had been raised on handheld screens, I would not have seen my mother, how she was talking on the phone with people, how she was interacting with people, that she was reading her Bible every day, that she was studying her Sunday school lesson. I would have just been in, headphones. So that's kind of how I grew up. And with my children, my oldest son was adopted when he was 16 months old. He was from the Philippines. So we started with a toddler. It was baptism by fire. I had a toddler, and he had changed his whole culture, food, everything. So that was not for the weak of heart. I mean, I dove into the deep end. So I made a lot of mistakes with both children. But overall, we took them to church and they went to Sunday schools, and we took our Bibles to church and we were reading our Bibles, and they have kept that up. They followed along with that. So that's one thing that I have found as I've talked to young moms today that I want them to have as a takeaway is if you're reading your Bible every day, which hopefully you are you reading a physical Bible or are you
Mm.
reading it on your phone? If you're reading it on your phone, that's better than not reading it, but your children don't know you're reading a Bible. From their perspective, when they look up and see you sitting on the sofa, drinking your coffee or whatever, and you're doing your devotion on your phone, you could be shopping on Amazon. They have no idea what you're doing. But if they see you with a physical Bible, they know what you're doing. So I want to encourage moms today to get a physical Bible and read that devotion from a physical Bible. I was sharing on a podcast not long ago that my sister and I, 2 years ago, had to close out my parents' estate. And they had lived in their home for 30 years. There was so much stuff to go through. But we found about 10 Bibles in that home. And I mean, they were just family Bibles, but they were well-used Bibles. And to me and my sister, that was basically our legacy. That was our legacy in that stack of Bibles, because my parents lived what was in that Bible. And as we studied the Bible, we knew, yeah, they did this. They didn't curse. They weren't drinking. We didn't have that kind of conflict. We weren't perfect, but we saw it modeled. And that's what I would like moms to think about, that it's not about, well, they can't have screens. It's about, what are they seeing you do? What are they going to remember about you when you're gone? Did they know what you believed? And do they have those images like I do, that mom's Bible was always by her bed and it had her Sunday school lesson stuffed in there? You knew she was reading it. She had a Bible on the coffee table that she read. And my grandmother's same thing, always right by their recliner, whatever, they had that Bible. And you could tell from looking at it, they were using it. So that kind of thing sticks with you. So I just want moms to think about that as they're thinking about discipling their children. And when they're young, obviously it's a little, babies, but they'll remember more than you think they'll remember.
That is so good, and such an easy thing for us to be conscious of. I really love that. And that's what I've done with my kids because of our situation. And then we're all on screens. I'm probably just as bad as they are.
I am too. I am too.
And it's like, okay, I need you to pay attention.
Yes.
Especially with autistic kids. Well, I guess maybe with all kids, trying to teach them to see something that needs to be done, like cleaned up or whatever. You can't just say clean the counter. You've got to take them through step by step.
Right.
Task analyze, break the task down
Right.
and walk them through the steps, or they just can't do it. They don't see it. So that's something I've done because of our situation, to just say, okay, let's get our attention here. Look at this and watch what I do. And then they can repeat it. And they do great once I do that. If I don't do that, then we're all frustrated. I've found to just even break that down into 15-minute segments. Okay, we're just going to take a break for 15 minutes and do this. Then we can go back to the work we need to get done on our computers or whatever. And that helps to keep it in small chunks. But I've never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're all on screens. I'm on screens as well. And obviously, screens are just going to be a part of life. There's very few families that are going screen free completely. But just realizing that it's like anything, you have to really keep a handle on how much of that, what kind of content. I've been reading some research lately that I can't cite it right off the top of my head, but a lot of today's moms are themselves finding out that the content that they watched, like the cartoons that they watched growing up, and the cartoons today have two different impacts on their children. If you put in like Barney from the 90s, okay, something like that, those cartoons were not as animated and as fast-paced and as bright. The cartoons today are computer generated. The colors are like abnormally bright, very fast-paced. There's too much going on with them. It's just like overstimulation. And they have found that these are moms doing this, and they'll film this and put this on Instagram. They notice when their children are watching those old cartoons, or they're just going back to VCRs, plugging in the VCR tape, watching the old stuff, that kids, they'll watch it and then they'll play and they'll watch it, but they're calmer. But when you put them on today's TV, something that's on today, they're glued. They can't quite break away and do much of anything else. But the minute you turn it off, it's a meltdown. It is an absolute meltdown. Their brain is overexcited. It's overstimulated. The colors are too much. It's like you can't stop watching it, but it's doing something to them. So you have to be careful about what they're watching. Think about that. Maybe look at some of the old stuff. go back to the VCR tapes, or maybe there's something on YouTube, things like that, and just be aware of the content that they're watching and the time. You have to really watch the time and making sure that they have other more productive things to play with in the home. Because the stuff that we saw, the children that were showing delays were basically not getting enough interpersonal interaction. Now, that's still a problem in some homes if the parents are working from home. It's going to make parents feel bad, and I understand that because I had to work from home too, and we were all on survival mode with COVID. But to be on a screen working from home, and your children have to be quiet. The only way to keep children quiet is to put them in front of a screen. It is the only way. That's what people did. But now we're learning, okay, that wasn't healthy. And we have to try to find some other ways to modulate that, or otherwise the children are going to struggle, parents are going to struggle. And like I said, we don't know yet whether it can all be undone.
Yeah. They're going to struggle as adults in the workplace. Well, and we focus a lot on what is the content they're watching, and that is important. But I don't think about what is the overstimulation that's happening. I know for a while there, they had some of the anime and stuff that came out from Japan was so fast paced, it was causing seizures because it was too pulsy or whatever. And so they've toned that down, but it's still crazy. My kids love all that. Even as adults.
They do. Like they do love it, and they get used to it. So they work at a faster pace than our generation did. The other thing to think about, and I have this in the book for moms to kind of learn about, is to think about the senses: vision, hearing, smell, taste, physical touch, movement. Screens overstimulate visual. So children are seeing maybe an apple, but they're not smelling an apple. When they have a real apple or a real book or something, there's also a smell there that's going with that we're missing with the screens. The sense of smell is one of the most basic, important senses that we have. When we get older, we remember like our grandmother's kitchen smells, right? Those smells are what we really go with. We were talking in one of my women's Bible study groups about why we like physical Bibles, because we like the onion skin paper, we like the tactile, and you like the smell of the book. But with a digital book, you don't get any of that. You don't get any of that. The children need a lot of sensory input as they're learning. They need to be moving and doing things instead of just like swiping it on a screen. They need to be manipulating and doing those things. And so that's something that I have in the book there for them to think about. Are your children getting all that sensory feedback? Because their brain is making memories of those things.
That's so good. Well, tell us the full name of the book and where we can find it, and then tell us where we can connect with you as well if people have questions or comments or something they want to share.
It's called The New Mom's Guide, Help and Hope for Baby's First Year. It's available on Amazon. You can also find it on my website at GinnyCruz.com. That's GINNYCRUZ.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram under those same names. So feel free to follow me there.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been fascinating. I want everybody to get the book, even if the baby's already 2-3 years old, because I think there's probably some things we can glean from that.
Still some stuff to learn, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking the same thing, and my kids are grown, but it's like being intentional about how we can make sure they're getting what they need for their brains to develop the way they need to, and for them to be equipped to handle the things they've got to handle in life. I mean, it all comes together. So I'm so glad you wrote this book. And I'm so thankful you came and shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you for spending time with us today. If we sparked any questions or comments, you can add those to the blog post down below the show notes. We have a place where you can leave a comment or a question, and we always love to hear from our listeners. So please take the time to do that. I'm sure with what Ginny shared, there's some questions you might have. as a parent. I know that we had a great conversation even after we finished recording. So much to talk about with raising our children and navigating our current situation with screens and media, and how we can be the best parents we can be to help our children and equip them. So if you have those questions, please post them, or you can reach out to her at her website, which is ginnycruz.com. And that is GINNYCRUZ.com. And the link will be in the show notes as always. And the link to her wonderful book will be in the show notes as well. If you have any questions for me or want to reach out, you can find me on my website, terryhellardbrown.com. I hope that you were blessed by the conversation today. And as always, our prayer for you is that you feel empowered, equipped, and encouraged to walk by faith and to embrace everyday discipleship every day with the children in your life.